I have ridden through 41 states in my life and I have seen things that would break most men and things that would rebuild them. I have sat with dying brothers on wet asphalt and I have ridden escort for children the world threw away. But of all the nights I have spent on blacktop, the one that still comes back to me clear as cold water is a Tuesday in late October, in a hollow road town called Carver's Bend, when I pulled into a gas station for fuel and ended up changing a young woman's life, though I didn't know that yet. I was road captain for the Iron Trace chapter out of eastern Tennessee, and that October I was running alone on a scouting leg for our November poker run, checking route mileage on a stretch of two-lane I hadn't ridden since the early years. Carver's Bend sat at the bottom of a long mountain grade, the kind of town where the main street has 3 empty storefronts for every one that's still open. The gas station was the old kind, single pump under a metal canopy, a hand-painted price board in the window. While my tank was filling, I noticed the municipal hall across the road, a squat brick building with its double doors propped open and the lights on inside, and I heard voices, not a crowd exactly, more like a room of people sitting politely while one voice ran things. I don't know why I crossed the street. Habit, maybe. A road captain pays attention to what's happening in a town, same as he pays attention to what's happening on the road. I stood in the back of that hall, helmet under my arm, leather cut still on, and I watched what turned out to be the monthly session of the Carver's Bend Town Council. There were maybe 40 people in the folding chairs, and up front behind a long table sat 5 council members in their sport coats, the chairman in the center with a gavel and a look on his face like he had already decided everything that needed deciding long before he walked in the door. I had seen that look before. Men who run small rooms like they're running kingdoms. She was standing at the public podium when I came in. Mid-20s, dark hair pulled back, wearing a blazer that looked like it had been ironed that afternoon with serious intention. She had a rolled paper under her arm and a bound proposal on the podium in front of her, and she was speaking in a voice that was clear but working to stay that way. Her name, I would learn later, was not important to the story. She was somebody's daughter, somebody's neighbor, and she had spent 2 years building a plan. The plan was a community bakery. The old hardware corner lot, which had been vacant since the hardware store closed in the years after the last mine scaled back. She wanted to buy it at the assessed value, build a small commercial kitchen, and run a licensed bakery that would also teach baking to the kids from the hollow on Saturday mornings, free of charge. She had the financing arranged, a small business loan pre-approved, co-signed by her family. She had the architectural drawings. She had letters of support from the school, the church, the 2 remaining diner owners, and a state agricultural extension. She had thought of everything a person can think of when they believe in something hard enough to lose sleep over it. The chairman let her finish. He waited just long enough after she stopped talking that the silence became uncomfortable, and then he laughed. Not a genuine laugh, a performance. He looked down at her proposal with 2 fingers, like he was handling something unpleasant, and then he looked at the room over the top of his reading glasses and he said that this was the kind of idea that sounded charming until you looked at the numbers, and that the lot in question had already been under discussion for a different purpose, and that perhaps the young lady didn't understand how municipal development worked. He said it gently, the way you say something to a child who has colored outside the lines. Then he held up her proposal, the bound copy, the one she had printed and assembled and carried up there, and he set it down on the edge of the table and pushed it off with 1 finger and let it fall to the floor. The room did not rise up. A few people looked at their hands. A couple of the older men in the back row chuckled. The council member on the chairman's left whispered something and the chairman smiled. The young woman stood at the podium and did not cry, which told me everything I needed to know about her character, because I could see from where I stood that she wanted to. She bent down, picked up her proposal from the floor, and walked back to her seat with her chin level. The meeting moved on. I stood in the back of that hall for another 30 seconds, and then I walked out. I sat on my bike in the parking lot for a while, watching the lights in the hall windows. My tank was full. There was nothing keeping me in Carver's Bend. The route notes were done and I had a long drive back to chapter in the morning. I pulled out my phone and I called our president. It was a short call. I told him what I had seen. He asked me 2 questions: was the lot a matter of public record, and was the next scheduled council session posted publicly? I told him yes on both counts. The October session was the application deadline. The vote would be tabled to the November session in 3 weeks' time. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, call the Ridgeline chapter and the Fork Road brothers both. Tell them we ride to Carver's Bend on the 14th. Tell them to be dressed and fueled by 7 in the morning. I made those calls from the parking lot of that gas station with the mountain at my back and the lights of the municipal hall still burning across the road. The Ridgeline president said he would need 2 days to reach all his people, but he said he'd be there. The Fork Road VP didn't even ask for details. He just said, "How far is the ride and what time do we leave?" That is the kind of answer you don't forget. Then I rode home. I want to be clear about something, because people sometimes misunderstand what a brotherhood does in a situation like this. We did not ride to Carver's Bend to threaten anyone. We did not ride there to intimidate the chairman into a specific vote, or to make anyone feel afraid. What we rode there for was simpler and older than any of that. We rode there because a person had done everything right, had planned and worked and prepared and shown up in good faith, and a man with a gavel and a personal interest in that corner lot had knocked her proposal to the floor and laughed, and the room had let him. We rode there because someone needed to fill that room who wasn't going to look at their hands. The 14th was a cold morning. We staged at a truck stop 20 minutes south of Carver's Bend, 88 riders from 3 chapters, lined up on the service road in the gray early light with engines idling and breath coming in small clouds. Some of the Fork Road brothers had ridden 6 hours through the night to make the staging time. Nobody complained about it. A couple of them were drinking coffee from paper cups and talking about the grade road up ahead. It was the most ordinary thing in the world to them. You get the call, you make the ride, you show up. That is not complicated. That is just what you do. I did a slow count on the way up the mountain. 88. The Ridgeline boys had brought 26. Fork Road had 29. Iron Trace made up the rest. We wore our cuts. We wore our patches. We rode clean and straight and 2 abreast on the grade road into town. I will tell you what it sounds like when 88 motorcycles come down a main street in a town of 800 people. It is not a sound that disappears into the background. People came to their windows. A man walking his dog stopped on the sidewalk. The woman who ran the remaining diner stepped out her front door with a dish towel in her hands and watched us pass. We parked on the street in front of the municipal hall in a line that ran the full length of the block. We filed inside in an orderly column and we took every seat in the hall and lined the walls and stood 3 deep at the back. The chairman was already at his table when we came in. I watched the color shift in his face as the room filled and kept filling. He conferred with the council member on his left. He shuffled his papers. He tapped his gavel twice at the start of the session, and both taps were quieter than the first one had been at the October meeting. The young woman was there. She had not known we were coming. She was in the same blazer, this time with her mother beside her, and when the hall filled with leather and patches and bearded men, I watched her eyes widen and then fill up, and she pressed her lips together and looked down at the table in front of her until she could steady herself. Her mother reached over and took her hand. Our president stood against the wall to the left. He did not speak. None of us spoke during the session unless we were addressed, and we were not addressed. We were simply there, 88 men who had ridden through cold mountain air at first light because the road captain had made a phone call and 2 words had been enough to get 3 chapters saddled up. We simply stood. The chairman called the lot development application to the floor for the November vote. He looked at his papers. He looked at the room. He looked at his papers again. He asked if there were any further public comments before the vote, and the young woman stood up and gave them the same proposal, the same numbers, the pre-approved financing and the architectural plans and the letters of support, her voice clearer this time than it had been in October, because this time she was not standing alone. When she sat back down, the room was absolutely still. The vote went 5-0 in her favor. Afterward, the president walked to the front of the hall and shook her hand, and then he shook her mother's hand, and I saw the mother say something to him that I couldn't hear from where I stood. He nodded and held her hand in both of his for a moment and then he let go. Then he turned to the room and said one sentence, in the quiet voice he uses when he doesn't need to raise it. He said, "This is a good town and it just made a good decision." Then he put his sunglasses back on and we rode out the same way we came in. That corner lot broke ground in the spring. I know this because I made a point of going back the following April, and the framing was already up. I went back again in October and the signage was on the building and the commercial kitchen had passed its inspection. She opened the first week of November, a Saturday, because the Saturday morning kids' baking class was the first thing she had ever written into the plan. I ride past every November now. I have never stopped in, that is not my place. But I slow down when I pass and I look through the front window and I can see the lights on in the kitchen and sometimes I can see a child standing on a step stool at a prep table with flour on her hands and an apron around her waist, learning something that will stay with her longer than she knows. People ask me sometimes what it means to have a code. They think it means rules, a list of things you will and won't do, a set of limits. And there are limits, sure. But the code is not really a list. The code is a direction. It points you toward the thing you are supposed to do when you are the only ones in the room willing to do it. That night in the parking lot of the gas station, I could have ridden home and left a young woman's dream to the men with the gavel. Nobody would have known the difference. Nobody would have blamed me. But I had seen her pick that proposal up off the floor and carry it back to her seat with her chin level. And some things, once you have seen them, will not leave you alone until you do something about them. 88 writers did something about it. That is all it was. That is all it ever needs to be.